Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Summit, the B2B episode. My name is Ben Jacobson, and I am the digital marketing strategist for Page One Power, and I'm also going to be your host today. We are joined, as I said, by a panel of SEO experts from a variety of large organizations within the B2B space. If you've ever tried to earn organic traffic from a B2B business before, you definitely know that it's no walk in the park. So thankfully, we have our guest panel here to share their thoughts and insight on running an effective organic campaign. So, without any further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today. We have Asia Frost, who is the head of English SEO at HubSpot. We have Kevin Indig, who is the director of SEO for Shopify. Justin Coons, who is a senior SEO at DigitalOcean. And Page One Power's very own Michael Johnson, who manages our partnership development. I'm actually going to pass it off to Michael here. He's going to tell us a little bit more specifically about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ben. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. Really what I wanted to do is you get to hear on our platform us talk quite a bit, but I thought it'd be awesome to bring in some industry experts. And one thing I wanted to do is to get some industry specific content going so that, people who do specifically focus on B2B can hear from people who work in their industry and hear, some of the challenges that they face, some of the successes that they've had and be able to ask the questions that they need to be successful. I put together a list of people, kind of had my wish list of people that I would love to have on the webinar, went through my network, tried to find some folks, and honestly couldn't have expected a better group of people to have today. So really excited to hear from our experts. One thing that we wanted to let you know about that'll be coming out after the webinar in a follow-up is we put together a B2B link building guide. So we'll send you a follow-up email. You'll get this guide in there. Feel free to go ahead and download that. Some really good information on what tactics to avoid, what tactics you can use to find success when it comes to link building specifically in the B2B space. As well, we'll be doing next month a link building workshop for B2B specifically. So keep an eye out for that. But for today, we're so excited to hear from our experts, and I'm going to kick it back over to Ben to start the Q&A.
Awesome. We're looking super forward to it, and we're definitely pumped about the link building guide that we've been working so hard on. So we hope you guys enjoy that. A couple things real quick. This is going to be a roundtable discussion, and so we want you guys to also be able to chime in. So if you look down below, you'll see that there's a Q&A button. Please feel free to use that in order to answer or ask any questions that you have during the presentation today. And with that, one thing that I do ask is sometimes it takes a few minutes to get to those questions. So if you can be as detailed as possible in your question, just so that we know what it is specifically you're referencing, rather than just saying, but how, or something like that to where it's a little nebulous. Just let us know what specifically you have a question about so that we can do our best to answer that later on. Additionally, we're going to be recording this today, so if you guys do have to step away for any period of time, that's totally cool. We'll actually have the recording up typically in about 24 to 48 hours after the fact. We'll have that available to replay. So great stuff there. And with that, we're just going to jump into our very first question. And I'm actually going to start this off. I'm going to ask Asia here first to answer, and then we'll kind of go around the table here. Asia, tell me what you think makes a good SEO leader.
I think first and foremost, a good SEO leader is really open to ideas. I talk about this a lot with my team or folks that I'm interviewing, but SEO as an industry is so young and so in flux that probably the worst way to lead is we've done it this way, so we're going to keep doing it this way style. I think that you can get the most out of your team members, whether they're veterans of the SEO industry or very, very new, if you're just extremely open to their ideas. And you could actually use the question, Ben, that you kind of just panned when someone comes to you with an idea. You can just say, but how? And kind of keep digging into that question and keep allowing them to explore their ideas. I think another really important quality of an SEO leader, and I think this will probably come up pretty often in the conversation today, is that you're really good at selling the importance of SEO all around the company. It doesn't matter if your folks bring you the best ideas in the world if you can't get the buy-in and the resources to implement them. So one thing that I've seen, I think a lot of SEO leaders neglect, and then kind of realize like, oh, wait, like this is kind of step 0 is making sure that everyone around and above you really gets why SEO is so critical to success. So those are probably my top 2. There are obviously many other traits, but I know that Kevin and Justin are going to have some ideas too.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a great point. Justin, what about yourself? What do you think makes a great SEO leader?
Yeah, I think everything that Asia mentioned, I'd second that. And I think as well, a great SEO leader is a great listener. A lot of times when an SEO kind of moves into a new role or takes on a new website or manages something new, the inclination is there to immediately start pointing out faults or to start looking in the website analytics and creating like a laundry list of things to fix. But I found that a lot of times when you kind of go in and start digging in, the most beneficial thing you can do is to start developing that rapport with your internal stakeholders, various, product managers, other marketing managers, business leaders. Listen to their concerns. And then I think that will drive a lot of direction for what you do, and then also establish some of your credibility.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point as well. Kevin?
Yeah, I think all of that is true. And if I would summarize that, I think there are basically, in essence, 2 jobs you have as a leader. One is results, and you're being hired for a reason, and most of the time that means business impact. It's not just SEO traffic, right? But business impact. But it also covers getting resources, getting alignment with other stakeholders, building relationships with other companies, and setting priorities, defining the strategy and a vision that really excites everyone. And then I think that other job is to build the right team, but also make sure that the team has meaningful relationships at work and works on meaningful projects or does meaningful work, right? So I think there's basically a tension of 2 relationships, or basically better said 2 responsibilities. The one is toward the company, right? And that's where you want to achieve, execute. And the other one is toward your team, where you want to develop people, make sure they work on the right things, and also that they get something from working on that, whether it's satisfaction, comp, right? All these things and development.
Perfect. Michael, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I had on the tail end of that was just thinking of understanding that SEO isn't done in a silo, right? It's something that interacts with a variety of areas of the site. And in our company, and I'm working with mostly SEO managers, digital marketing managers at companies. We always love to create a lot of content. We're doing our outreach, and it's so easy to forget about kind of the greater ecosystem of a company and all the people that content matters to. So it's not just your SEO manager that you're talking to. There's probably a head of content at the company. When it comes to the outreach, there's probably a PR department that's a little concerned about the outreach that's going on. Though there's so many different moving pieces. And so, Asia talked about buy-in and that kind of a thing. So it's so important to, be mindful of the other people in the organization and knowing how SEO interacts with their departments, so that you can be able to speak their language and better make your case about what you're doing and the why behind why you're doing it.
Perfect. And I think that's a great point. I think just understanding the why behind a question or behind a task, I think can be so beneficial on both sides of the coin. So excellent. Thank you guys so much. We actually got our first audience question here. I'll read this out to you guys. In my experience, explicitly B2B keywords often correspond to lower search volume terms, such as brands, product names, categories, etc. And the SERPs are often dominated by reviews, lists, and referrals. How do you go about finding new relevant content and keywords inside of this ecosystem? So that's a pretty heavy-hitting question there, and we'll give you guys a few seconds to kind of think about it and formulate your thoughts here. Let's jump over to Justin. Justin, what would you say in that type of situation for this attendant?
Yeah, speaking from my own personal experience at DigitalOcean and then previously at Twilio, our B2B audience is primarily developers. And so we found that reaching developers through SEO isn't really a process of marketing directly to them or searching for keywords that are like highly transactional, but more kind of along the kind of developer community aspect. So we want to search for keywords and create content that's helpful for a developer along their journey. So no matter what they're building, we're kind of researching and targeting keywords that would be useful for a developer. And ideally they discover us, you know, it's ultra top of funnel that a developer who discovers us that way likely isn't going to convert on that same visit, but we know within the community that a good touch point like that is highly valuable. So maybe if they're not building something with us now, maybe they will at some point, and then that's where they kind of come in through the eventual, you know, bottom funnel brand search, and then that's our conversion point.
Perfect. Great answer. Let's see here. Kevin, what about you? How would you attack this particular situation?
Attack. I like it. To battle. No, I'm kidding. Generally, the thing is, search volume is a super flawed metric, right? On the one hand, it's really a blessing in SEO because it allows us to size opportunities or size the market, which is almost unique in our area compared to other fields of marketing. And on the other hand, it's pretty flawed for many reasons, right? Like it comes from ads, almost primarily developed for ads, doesn't really distinguish between mobile and desktop and so on. Like there's a whole list of reasons for why it's you have to take it with a big grain of salt. And so the most accurate representation of demand in SEO is actually impressions that you can see in Google Search Console. And I wrote a while about a process that I call content tuning, where you basically look at your content in Google Search Console on a page level, you see all the queries that the content ranks for. And what you sometimes see is that you rank for a query on the second page or maybe even third page, and you get a significant amount of impressions for that query. And that's an opportunity to see, can you either tweak the content of that page for that query and get more traffic or rank higher for it, or can you create a new page for that? And so that's something that I would recommend is like go deep on your Google Search Console data, see if there are queries that you get a lot of impressions for that are relevant to you, that you can create some content for, and use that as a keyword exploration process instead of just going by search volume because of the flaws of the metric.
Love it. Perfect. Thank you. Asia, did you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think at HubSpot, we have followed Justin's approach, definitely going for the very top of the funnel content that we know will convert people down the line, building trust with content that has no mention of software or products. But I also think if you have the resources, like if you can't beat them, join them. So one thing that we've experimented with quite a bit is writing product listicles that of course feature HubSpot very prominently, usually number one. And we've seen a lot of success getting those to rank for, you know, best email marketing software, best lead generation software. So that would not be my primary recommendation. If you can only write, you know, 5 blog posts a month, I wouldn't say make all of those product listicles because it usually takes a long time to get those to rank. It's pretty competitive, depending on how new your site is or like how many backlinks you're able to generate to those pieces. It might not be worth doing it all, but if you can, that's kind of a backdoor into those SERPs. And you're never going to be Capterra or G2, but you don't necessarily have to be.
Love it. Perfect. And Michael, did you have anything that you'd like to finish us out with?
Yeah, the thought that kind of came into my mind is a phrase I've used a lot at conferences lately when I speak is kind of talking how Google's more like a library than it is a strip mall. And often what you'll have is a lot of people, especially the higher ups, like C-level in an organization, are so focused on the conversion aspect of it. And they think that this is a place to rank for your money keywords and get people to buy, when really like most search intent is informational. Most people are looking to gather information when they're looking at Google. And so, you know, your content strategy should reflect that, and your keyword strategy should reflect that. You know, don't just address the bottom part of your funnel, but address each part of that buyer's funnel. And that's something that Asia and Justin commented on, is think about that top of the funnel, the questions that your audience asks in their day-to-day job and things that they're working on and questions that they have. You know, if you make your website a great resource that's answering people's questions, that's what's gonna, get you in front of your audience early on, as they're, maybe if they're not even starting to make a decision yet, but get in the door early with them so you can start educating them and get them into your funnel. So that's my main piece of feedback there.
Love it. Let's jump into our next question here. And this is something that I think will kind of set a little bit of the mood, the pace, the ethos, if you will, of today's webinar. And the question is this: are there any unique challenges that B2B brands specifically face when it comes to SEO that you don't find with B2C companies? And let's start off with Kevin.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest one is probably user-generated content. There are exceptions. We talked about G2 before, and even at Atlassian, where I worked for a couple of years, we had Trello, which was kind of a B2C, B2B hybrid. It was living somewhere in between. But there was a use case where we could actually build a flywheel or a growth loop from user-generated content. And that's always a very powerful situation. It kind of shifts the attention more to technical SEO, and indexing, and a couple of other topics that you usually wouldn't have when all your content is self-generated or company generated. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges. And then I think also that as a B2B company, there is going to be a cap of when SEO makes sense. So if you have a very techy product, you're really in that high enterprise segment, and your company is very sales driven, SEO there is probably more of a second, third, fourth, or fifth thought, and probably should be, to be realistic. So I think those are two unique challenges you only face on B2B.
Perfect. Thank you. Asia, did you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think the time to results and the difficulty of tracking your results is probably a lot harder for B2B than B2C. Like, I get jealous thinking about how easy it would be to show value if you were ranking for a transactional query where someone is going to buy right away. Like, that would make my life so great. I would just be like, yep, we ranked for this, and now we make this, and can I get a promotion? It's always a lot more indirect, as we just talked about. Like, there are multiple touch points. Tracking, I talk about this a lot. Probably everyone who talks to me about SEO is sick of it, but like, tracking is just getting way more difficult. And so we're having an even harder time showing that like a page that helped someone convert 6 months down the line is worth building in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the time to seeing results, I think, can be a big detractor for sure. Justin, what about you? Did you have anything that you'd like to add? How would you define unique challenges that B2B brands face?
Yeah, one of the trickiest ones I've faced is that over the course of a sales cycle at a B2B brand, like, the lead will cross user personas. So the person who would initially, discover the website through content that we have, submit a lead, would probably be like a boots on the ground type of individual contributor type role. So like a developer or an HR professional, or someone who's, kind of in the weeds every day. But then when it comes to the point, like particularly with medium-sized businesses and enterprise, is that, someone's got to write a check. And so oftentimes the content that you write for the developer has to be vastly different than the content that you're writing for the line of business user, because the developer doesn't care about the line of business stuff, and the person sitting in finance or the CMO really doesn't care about the development stuff. And so it kind of gets outside of the realm of strictly SEO, where you're discovering keywords and writing content for them. And you're more kind of sculpting a journey for multiple users throughout that sales cycle so that they can efficiently find all of your content throughout the process and not get confused at any point. And that's, I think, a particularly tricky part of B2B SEO.
Michael, what do you think is kind of like a unique B2B feature or bug, if you will, of doing SEO inside of B2B versus B2C? How do you kind of see those differences there?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like link building specifically, which is kind of where I spend most of my time talking about with folks, is you've kind of got a more limited audience compared to your typical kind of B2C brand. B2B, often people get so focused on their industry, on their service, and their direct audience who's going to buy from them, that, when it comes to link building, to me, what link building is about is building connections between your brands and other people on the web. And if you start with a very limited audience, you're going to not have very many opportunities. So kind of one of the things that we often work with a lot of B2B brands is, okay, let's help you create content that expands and that kind of touches on those spheres of relevancy that are associated with your industry and with your audience, not just the people who are going to buy from you, but creating content that connects your brand with new audiences. And so that's kind of one of the things I see a lot of B2B brands struggle, especially in link building, is just that restricted audience. And then from there, figuring out a way to how they can relevantly expand that audience and create more opportunities for links.
Perfect. Yeah, great point. We do have another question coming in. John asks, how do you pitch a backlinking strategy to a client that has hesitations? The most common issue we run into is the backlinking strategy recommendation to a client's KPI or business goals. The line from one to the other is rarely straight, and backlinking takes time to show return on investment. Asia, let's start with you. How would you pitch that backlinking strategy to a hesitant client?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and kind of speaks to what I was talking about earlier, where you really have to take a leap of faith sometimes, especially when you're talking to executives or your stakeholder, your client, that what they're going to do now will generate revenue down the line. I think probably the simplest way to do this is to find one of their competitors who is ranking for a query or queries that they want to rank for, and say, look, they have X number of backlinks, you have Y number of backlinks. If you want to rank for these same queries, you're going to have to get from Y to X. And so here's our plan for doing that. But showing them a real life example, especially someone that they kind of want to meet, will probably help them get over that hesitancy.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. Justin, what would you do if you had a client that is showing hesitancy when you're trying to pitch them a backlinking strategy?
Yeah, 100% to Asia's point as well, is like, I kind of like a less is more approach, particularly with client management. So we don't necessarily need to bore them with all the stats about domain authority or various things that we could kind of boil down. Like, the performance of your website and SEO comes down to your technical hygiene, your breadth of content, your quality of content, and your linking. And we could pretty easily visualize, like, here's how we're doing on all of these compared to the competition. And if we see that linking is the one area where there's a shortfall, then it's like, okay, let's triage the most important area, and we can start there.
Great point. Excellent. Kevin?
Yeah, I think all of these are great strategies. One idea that I want to add to that is to see if you can test it at small scale. So instead of committing to a whole backlink strategy, can you maybe agree with the client on building links for one page to drive one keyword up or a couple of keywords to prove the concept and then get their buy-in?
Excellent idea. Michael, what about you? How would you kind of present, or how do you overcome client hesitations when it comes to backlinking strategies?
I had a big smile when Kevin said what he said, because that took the words right out of my mouth. I love doing like a proof of concept approach, like having a limited scale, just saying like, hey, or limited scope, saying like, hey, let's really focus on this page or this theme, this area of the site. And let's, and from there, you can explain how your strategy is going to help that. So for example, a lot of clients will come to us with like a product page or a service page that they want to try to get links back to. And the truth is, link building is more of an informational endeavor than an advertorial endeavor, unless, you want to go out and pay for links and do those kinds of things that violate webmaster guidelines. You often have to have something of value to provide to audiences. And so often what we have to then, it goes back to the very first question that we asked. My answer was talking about like explaining the why to people, is like, hey, well, we're going to need to create some great engaging content that's going to get people to want to link to you. And then like explaining how internal linking can help to better support that product page, how you can use internal linking from your content strategy to support those pages that are further down the funnel. And so that's one of the things that I like to talk about is, having a focus, kind of a proof of concept, if you will. And then from there, creating content that supports that, and then explaining how you can be strategic in supporting that page.
Perfect.
Let's
jump on. Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Just to add on to Michael's point, I think the proof of concept or the MVP is probably like the most effective strategy you can use for combating concerns or getting buy-in no matter what you're doing. Like, it doesn't have to be getting buy-in for backlinking. It could be getting buy-in to create a new type of content or appeal to a new audience, or, you know, even run a new type of ad. I think if you go in real hot and you're like, I need all this money and it's going to take all these months and you're just going to have to trust me, that's really hard to get a strong yes for, unless you have, you know, a lot of goodwill and trust built up. If you're like, hey, I'm just going to do this small thing, it's just going to run for a couple of weeks, it's not going to be that expensive, and I'm going to have results to show you at the end, and we can go from there, you're so much likelier to get a yes.
Love that. The next question that I have here is actually taking the same concept and actually just maybe tweaking it slightly. But how would you go about getting the same sort of buy-in, not necessarily from a client, but maybe from leadership inside of your own organization? So kind of taking that same premise and maybe flipping it a little bit. But let's start with, let's see here. Justin, let's start with you. How would you go about if you are in an organization and you understand the needs for SEO? How would you go about getting buy-in from higher ups inside of the organization?
Yeah, it kind of touches on a lot of the topics that we've covered so far, and that there's, I think, a bit of, I don't know if teaching is the right word, but you kind of come into a role where you're like, it's really important to express what's important for SEO. So sitting down with leaders in the organization and kind of telling them, okay, here's what I do. They say it's kind of a black box or it's a bit of voodoo or whatever, but really, like, we know generally how it works. Here's how it works. And then I think that that works to alleviate a lot of concerns within the organization. And from there, I think that can help build trust. And then when you have that level of trust, it does make it easier to pitch things to internal stakeholders.
Excellent. Kevin, what about yourself? How would you go about trying to win the buy-in from leadership?
I love how you mentioned the word trust, Justin. I think that goes a really far way. If you've proven yourself over and over again, your buy-in is automatically going to be greater. And at Shopify, we call this a trust battery. If it's fully charged, you can typically run with much bolder projects. And when it's empty, you better have a really good rationale and some data and an MVP maybe, or some experiments. I think besides the things that we mentioned, which are all important to keep in mind, one thing that we haven't talked about that much yet is a good narrative. I think that sometimes just getting people excited for a strong vision for something, you know, that really that fits into the company's mission as well, that can go a far way. Because the reality is that even though we try to make as many decisions as possible based on data and objectivity, most decisions are actually made with gut and with emotions. And you can totally play into that and get people excited, right? Like, I also think there's a very low gameability factor, at least in most companies that I worked with, in my experiences. Like, it's going to be really hard to BS your way through a narrative and get people excited, right? And if it stands on solid pillars, it's one of the most powerful things you can do.
Love that. Perfect. Adrian, what about yourself? How would you kind of attack the same problem?
Yeah, I think it's great that Kevin brought up narrative, because I think that is such an important aspect of SEO. And we've talked about the people side of things a lot already in this webinar, but a lot of times I see people just obsess over the numbers or the MVP or whatever, like the quantifiable part of the experiment is, forgetting that you still have to present this pitch to people who are going to sign off on it. So I think one thing that all SEOs should get good at is presenting, like creating slide decks and making them look beautiful and giving a good pitch. Because again, you can have a great idea, but if you don't get buy-in, it doesn't matter. So completely agree with what Kevin said there. I think the other thing that you can do in getting buy-in from leadership that you often don't have the latitude to do when it's with a client or someone that you're working with on a more short-term basis is to really understand the leader's background. So if they're from marketing, like, what area of marketing did they specialize in? what about your pitch is going to resonate with them, because they're going to be like, oh, that's familiar. Like maybe they've never done SEO, but they were on, growth. And so they're really familiar with like some of those metrics or some of those concepts. And you can even ask like, hey, I want to make sure that like what I'm telling you makes sense. Can you tell me a little bit about you and where you come from and what you're interested in? And then I can explain how SEO fits into like our broader strategy. So spending that time up front to really get to know them, what they care about and what they'll understand will help your pitch go down much more smoothly.
Yeah, I think having a mutual understanding in a lot of places and having like some level ground, I think is an excellent place to start. Justin, what about yourself? How would you kind of take on the same question?
I feel like I might have already answered this question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There we go. There's the first one. I knew that I was going to screw up the order. So there it is. Michael. Yeah.
Real quick though, Ben. Yeah. I loved a couple different points. Kevin with the trust battery. I love that. That is I'm going to have a high in mind. And I always think about that, like whenever I go in, for me, for a lot of the SEO managers and folks panel, like them, it's often pitching within the organization. For me, it's pitching to SEO managers and who has to go pitch in their organization. And for me, like the trust battery side of it is showing them that you're prepared, you've done the research, that you understand, what they're trying to do. And so, for me, anytime I jump on a call with a prospect, my first thing is never to try to like sell them something. It's always ask questions, learn about them and understand what they're trying to do. And like Asia said, look at their background, understand, kind of where they come from in the marketing industry. That can help you. And kind of the second thing was just speak their language. Like if you're talking to somebody who's very financially focused, think about the ROI and talk about those kinds of aspects. If you're talking to somebody who's more marketing focused, you can talk about impressions or leads, those kinds of topics. So think about the person that you're talking to and adapt the language to them. One of the presentations I gave an example of a brand that was really struggling to drive non-branded search traffic. And this is it's not a client of ours, just something I saw through as I was researching companies out there. And they were struggling to drive non-branded, like 99% of their traffic was all branded search. And I was like, how could this SEO manager at this company make a pitch internally to get them to want to invest in content? Because that was my big point, was like, oh, if they just invest in this informational content. So Asia talked about kind of like showing competitors during the link building question earlier. I found a competitor that was driving, I think it was $10 million worth of traffic. So to buy the traffic to PPC, it costs $10 million a year to get that traffic. And so right there, you've got a great way to speak the language of like maybe a C-level person who's very financially focused by saying, hey, we're missing out on $10 million a year of traffic by not implementing an effective content strategy. Let's talk about that. And then that would be a great way to open up that conversation. So I know that got a little long-winded, but lots of great points that I just was happy to jump on there.
No, I think that's excellent. Let's jump into, and we have another question from our audience here. And Kevin, we'll start off with you for this one. The question says, when creating content for a B2B audience, do you find it viable to reach the C-suite and other business leaders by speaking directly to their respective customers, targeting content to the audience your own business customers are trying to reach with their brands?
Potentially. In certain markets, I could see that work. However, you better have a really strong product. Otherwise, your customers probably won't talk about it. And also just like reaching C-suite is really, really hard, even from just a sales perspective, right? Let's like not even talking about SEO and content. So another issue is that C-level executives often don't have any time to like Google stuff or so, right? They will delegate that, or they will find things in a different way. So generally, tackling C-suite, I find that very, very difficult. I also think, from my observation, especially at Atlassian, that more and more companies make software decisions or product decisions bottoms up. I mean, acquiring products, buying software solutions or tools, bottoms up instead of tops down. I think the time where a CTO came to room was, okay, now we're using this tool is pretty much over, and it's much more democratic process. So on the one hand, I think it's hard to reach C-levels. On the other hand, I think that there is a lot of room for bottoms up growth. And you have to evaluate whether that's really SEO. It might work in some cases, but in many other cases, it might not work. At Atlassian, we were very lucky because we established ourselves very early on with really good content hubs around topics like Git and agile development. And that really worked well from a bottoms up perspective, but I'm not sure if that would really work in any case, right? One thing to not forget is that we marketers are super, have a high affinity for Google and social media, right? We're really out there, we're using it all the time. Not every target audience acts that way. And so you have to be very smart and careful with the channels you use to target or achieve, to cater to an audience when you go bottoms up.
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks, Kevin. AJ, let's jump over to you. How would you go about answering this question here?
Yeah, I largely agree with Kevin. I think, again, it's something that sounds really sexy, like, oh yeah, let's talk directly to the C-suite, like let's make our mark on them. And then you actually get down to it and you're like, wait, like this is really hard. It's hard to figure out what queries like the C-suite would search for that wouldn't be like anyone else in the org. Like if you can figure that out, message me. And I don't know how viable it is as a strategy long term. So I like the democratic approach.
Excellent. Justin, what about yourself?
Yeah, same, 100% with everyone else. We found attempting this at Twilio that there really isn't much SEO like potential for the highest levels of C-suite users. That really the content that reaches them the best is like thought leadership, aspirational, like here's how you can get on the cutting edge of different things, which is almost antithetical to SEO because you're basically creating the category or the subject there. And so yeah, starting with kind of the boots on the ground folks and making it more of a bottoms up motion, I think is more successful.
Michael, what do you think about trying to reach out and interact directly with C-suite? How would you kind of approach that question?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that always comes in my mind is like whenever I get pitched from like a company, like a events company, like, hey, we're gonna have all like the CEO or CMO of these companies here, and I'm always like, I don't like trying to explain link building to a CEO at a company. Like that's not my, I'd rather speak to the SEO manager or the digital marketing manager of an organization. That's who speaks my language. I talked earlier about speaking people's languages. Like that's who I can connect with the best. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think Kevin mentioned kind of the bottom up approach is often how people are making decisions nowadays. They're, hearing from the people who specialize in those areas and they make the recommendations upward. So, speak to the person who's going to use your solution or your product, and then from there, provide them with values that they can make the best recommendation possible. So be the best option to them. That's kind of how I view it. Even as somebody who gets sold to regularly, that's what I like to hear is the people who are speaking to me and want me to speak to the people who I'm trying to connect with.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. Let's jump into our next question here. Asia, we're going to actually start off with you here for this one. And this actually goes in and ties really well with what Justin was just saying here a few moments ago. The question is this. I see B2B brands really wanting to create thought leadership content. Is this kind of cutting edge content strategy very compatible with SEO, or does it belong more on social media side of marketing?
Yeah, so exactly what Michael said, that thought leadership can be kind of antithetical to SEO. I think if you are providing a content strategy with search traffic in mind, you're going to steer directly away from the topics that probably would be the most cutting edge, because often it's a brand new idea or it's an idea that's just starting to be talked about, which means that when you look in Ahrefs or Search Console or any of the tools that you find impressions and clicks from, like it's probably not going to show up. And if it is, then it might already be too late and everyone's already talking about it and you need to find the next topic. So at HubSpot, then those two functions are actually divorced. And we don't really try to steer the thought leadership team because those constraints are probably more harmful than helpful.
Great point. Justin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, said it perfectly. We have a similar structure at DigitalOcean where We have kind of a like a more SEO focused arm, and then like a content team that focuses more towards kind of big ideas and thought leadership. And yeah, I think one time they asked me for some direction on SEO, and I told them, please no, like think of good ideas yourself, because anything that's going to be frequently asked is not thought leadership, basically by definition.
It's a good point. I like that approach to it. That makes a lot of sense. Kevin, what about yourself? How would you how would you describe that? Do you think that those two things are antithetical to each other, or?
To a certain degree, yes, as in you probably run a different strategy for each of them. I think one often overlooked factor in thought leadership content is the leadership part, right? Everybody wants to put thought leadership out there, but there are only so many leaders in the category. And so if Salesforce writes about sales processes or CRM, that has a different quality than a new startup that is just coming on the scene. And so you have to be thinking about, where do you have credibility and trustworthiness with your audience, and where do they actually see you as kind of the authority in the space? I think that can tie very well to SEO in certain aspects, right? Like we often hear this concept of EAT in SEO, which stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And it's more kind of a principle of what Google tries to achieve. They just try to like rank more authoritative sites. And so I think that's where the two strategies can tie together, right? When you say, okay, how do we build credibility and trustworthiness and authority? Can we do that with maybe not so thought leadershipy content, cutting edge content? And then at some point when we have that base, can we then put something out there that's more controversial and bold? Because when we really think about it, what people share and what they respond to in terms of thought leadership content always surprises them, educates them, or goes against something that they strongly believed in completely, right? And so, or like you think about that, one thing comes to mind is this like vision from Lyft. I think the CEO wrote about that, where he like envisioned a carless future and so on and so on. That made perfect sense, right? Because Lyft is right in that space. They're very well known, and the CEO writes this article. Maybe it was ghostwritten, who knows? And it's a very bold vision, right? It's like something very bold out there that catches attention. And so, what I'm trying to say is, in a nice way, kind of know your place, right? Like know how much of an influence you are in that space. And if not, then think about how can you establish yourself more as an authority, or maybe as an entity that people have heard about before.
Excellent. Thank you. Michael, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the one thought I had on this, and it's a little bit in a different direction, but just the idea that not all content can do everything or be everything. Like, a thought leadership. I like that the person said, is it compatible with SEO, or should it be more of a social media play? Like, one thing that a lot of brands will come to us for is like, hey, we created this super in-depth research guide with tons of statistics from our industry, or like a thought leadership piece. Can you build links back to this? And the question I always ask is, okay, well, why would someone link to this? And number two, who would link to this? And if you kind of ask those questions and start to think, well, okay, these pieces are accomplishing really good things for you, maybe from social media, maybe from like a press perspective. But, when we start asking like, who would actually link to this and why would they link to it? You might realize, okay, this piece actually isn't good for link building. I need to create a piece that is specifically created for link building, to earn links, that I did research and found all these resource pages that dedicated to this audience. And I can now create this guide for this audience that help me get links from those kinds of resource pages. Like, think about the kinds of pages that link and the kind of people that link when you're trying to create linkable content, and that can help you. So, kind of went off a little bit of the rails on that one, but the main idea was just, it's okay that some content doesn't do everything. You can create content to do specific things for you.
Love it.
Yeah. I would almost say it would be a little bit of a red flag if someone asked you to build links to a thought leadership piece, because ideally the links would be organically generated because it's a very shareable, linkable piece of content. I think you want thought leadership to be like your backlinks magnet versus something that you have to expend a lot of energy to build links to, when you could be using those resources for high converting blog posts or product pages or what have you.
Love it. Well, let's jump into our next question here. We're cruising right along, guys. It's already 47 minutes past, so we're going to try to sneak in a couple more questions here. Let's see. Let me pull up this next question for us. So this one says, how would you approach the question from ownership about paid ads versus SEO? The context is competitive, enterprise level B2B SaaS software with six-figure investment for customers. There are a lot of major competitors already ranking, plus the G2s and Capterras are already taking up those precious page one spots. For further context, our website is relatively new in the space, and with a handful of pages, one keywords we have right now, we are not generating a substantial amount of traffic. So a little bit more in-depth question here for you. Let's see, Justin, I think we are to you, if I didn't mess up the order again this time.
Yes, yeah. So speaking from the SaaS perspective, kind of more on the platform side, I find that the investment in SEM is highly critical to getting visibility in as many keywords as possible in search. So what I've found typically doing keyword research is that there are a lot of keywords out there that you would figure have a nice transactional intent, that like the user who'd be searching for it is ready to sign up for something or buy something. But typically what you see returned in the SERP is like guides. So like, what is a managed database or something like that? And so what's really frustrating about that from the organic perspective is that even if you're able to rank your guide #1 or whatever, and you get 30% of that traffic, you have users coming into an editorial piece. So the conversion rate on that isn't going to be as good as if users were coming into like a more transactionally focused landing page. So leveraging the PPC side allows you to not only get visibility, but get traffic into the ideal landing page for you. So those would almost always be higher converting. And then typically, I've also kind of run into this question of, okay, we're ranking well for a keyword, should we buy ads for it? And I don't know if this is SaaS or platform specific, but I've typically found that when you buy ads for a keyword where you have a good organic presence, it has an additive effect more than a subtractive effect. The click-through rate for both the ad and the organic search result rise. So like, far and away, there are way more pros to running PPC in the SaaS space than there are trying to wait for organic to take off for you.
It's an excellent point. Kevin, what about you? How would you answer this question here?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. At Atlassian, we ran quite a lot of incrementality tests, challenge incrementality, right? So to basically figure out, okay, once you add paid ads, Google ads to your organic keywords, what's the effect, right? Like, do you see some sort of cannibalization, but still a net positive effect, or is it like a complete addition or additive effect, and so on? So it's interesting. What we found out is that it varies by brand and it varies by topic as well, right? So if you have a super strong brand, people will seek out the organic result even if you don't bid on it from a Google Ads perspective. And when it comes, it's very similar actually for non-brand keywords, right? If you have that reputation, then people might seek you out. And then it has more of an additive effect. So there's a lot of dynamics in there. But generally, from a philosophical standpoint of view, I don't think there should be a question about ownership. I think these two departments and teams should work together to go after, the opportunities that are out there. And so even if there is some sort of a cannibalization, you can still use Google Ads to kind of spearhead and go after topics you don't rank for organically yet. And then once your organic ranking goes up further, you can tone down ad spend and just get really efficient with where you put your money. So I would try to come at it from that narrative perspective.
Love that. Perfect. Asia, what about yourself?
Yeah, I couldn't tell from the question whether it was, should we do both or one of these things, or who should own it? I think Kevin answered the who should own it pretty well. Like, you don't have to have ownership over it. You should just work together. Definitely, if it's a question of should we do one or both, I would say both. And I think Justin kind of touched on this too, but with paid, you turn the faucet on, the water comes out. You turn the faucet off, the water stops. It's pretty instantaneous. With SEO, it's often like you turn the water on, you go, you do some chores, you do something else, you come back, the water's finally running, you can't shut it off. So I think that especially if your site is younger, you're still trying to generate authority, I would definitely be running ads, while you tackle not just the bottom of the funnel keywords, but as we talked about earlier, the higher funnel, more educational content where you're not competing as much with G2 and Capterra and the like. So that by the time those pages are ranking and converting, you can, turn the spigot off and you'll still have water.
Love that. Michael, what about yourself? How would you kind of approach this?
Yeah, I mean, I echo what Asia said about, it's usually not one or the other. And then also kind of what Kevin said, where it's kind of a progression of, early on, yeah, some keywords you just won't be able to rank for a long time. They're super competitive. It's just going to take you some time to get there. So, PPC is that great temporary solution for that. But it was a study I saw recently, a percentage just talking about the general ROI of organic search versus paid search. And organic search does over the long run have a much higher ROI for brands. So it is one of those things that even if you are going to do, I would highly recommend doing PPC in the short time so you can start capturing some people and get some conversions going. But don't forget to invest in your SEO, because if you can get to that point and build that up over time, then that's going to be a lot more lucrative to you in the long run. So that'd be my piece of advice there is, it's not one or the other. It should be a little bit of both. But yeah, of course, you got to do one at the early point to help you be successful and get some conversions.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you, guys. We're going to ask one more question here, and we're going to let each of you guys respond, and then we'll be wrapping it up here shortly. So the question here that we have, and I apologize in advance if we didn't get to all of your questions. We'll do our best to try to answer these after the fact through like Twitter or anything like that if we get a chance to. But this question here, let's start out. In terms of writing content to attract web traffic, how do you find the balance of using those keywords to get organic traffic and writing good content? I found that I've been trying too hard to hit those keywords and it can detract from the content by making it sound unnatural. So let's see here. Let's start with Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's uncommon, right? And I did grow up in that SEO era where that was the most important point. How often you mention the keyword. That was a lot of fun. But today, it's so much more about intent. And so even though I would suggest to still have the keyword in the title, maybe in an H1, right? There are some areas where you want to care a bit more about the keyword. Altogether, I care less about the keyword and much more, do I really solve the user's problem? Now, to be fair, right? There's a spectrum of that, right? And I think I more lean toward problem solving, user intent, and how can I really help them? What are they basically trying to achieve? And that helps me to kind of take a step back from the keyword itself. I also think that one completely underrated aspect of creating content is that you can tune and tweak the content and change it over time. So rather come maybe from like an under-optimized perspective, put the thing out there and then go back to it after a couple of weeks and see, hey, how does it do? Do I need to change something? Do I need to adjust something? Is there a key piece of information missing, or maybe a paragraph? So I also think that way too often we just like ship it and forget it, while I more have the philosophy that every piece of content needs to earn its place. Whether it's SEO or not. And so if it's a piece that should drive more organic traffic, then get it out there, be super helpful, and then go back and tweak it until you get on that first page into the top ranking positions.
Excellent, thank you. Asia, how would you go about solving this issue here?
Yeah, first I just have to say that I just pictured Kevin like barking at his blog post, like, you must each earn your place here.
That is true. That is hard.
True. Yeah. But anyways, I definitely think optimizing over time is such a key strategy. Like one thing that we've often seen is that we will get a way bigger boost in traffic just from tweaking an existing piece of content than writing a net new one. So whether or not you're trying to, re-optimize for keywords, I would just focus on continually keeping your content up to date and making it fresh and relevant, because you'll get a lot of gains there. But for the person that asked this question specifically, I wonder if you're trying to target too many keywords at once. That is often why content can kind of sound unnatural, because you're just stuffing in keywords kind of wherever you can. If you're targeting one main keyword and then a few subsidiary ones, then it usually doesn't sound too unnatural. And you don't have to use the exact same phrase in that exact same order throughout the piece. You can really just use it once and some synonyms. And if you're answering the searcher's intent and the question thoroughly and thoughtfully, then that should definitely be enough to rank for that keyword. Well, provided everything else is in line. And that's definitely not enough, but that's your starting place. So I would say look at whether you're trying to do too much with one piece, and then maybe like disable your SEO plugin if you're using one, because I can find that those also often lead you to like over engineer a piece of content. And I think you'll probably be in a better spot.
Excellent. Thank you. Justin, what about yourself?
Yeah, 100%. I would say to almost always boil down your content to one pretty simple theme or topic. Otherwise, you get lost in the world of keywords. And then I think additionally too, if the audience that you're trying to reach has a certain level of implied expertise, where like you're going after someone who knows what they're doing, it can make it particularly awkward to write more SEO forward content. So I think that's where it's a lot better to do that same exercise where you're thinking, okay, here's our target keyword. You know, we can use a tool like ClearScope or something to understand how long it should be and how or what type of content is kind of like table stakes to include for SEO here. But really, it should be down to writing a piece that's more targeted to your users' intent and their level of credibility with you. Otherwise, it comes off looking kind of fake. And so that's kind of the struggle there.
It's definitely a good point. Michael, bring us home. Tell us how you would kind of approach and how you would answer this question.
Yeah, so much of it to me just comes down to like the user experience first, thinking about like what's going to read well to your user. And first of all, what's going to answer their question. I think Kevin mentioned intent earlier on. And to me, it's like addressing user intent is so important. I'm going to break the rules here. I'm going to use a B2C example because this is a piece that I love. I saw it a few years ago. And when it comes to like crushing it for keywords around finding the right snowboard for you, this article is awesome. It outranks like much bigger brands. And you can see why. It's like, number one, they just, they use their titles, really, they use their headers. But what they do is they ask like questions. They ask questions they know their audience is searching for, and they answer the question right there. Like that's such a good user experience. And it's a great way to show Google. It's like, we're answering the questions that people are asking along the way. So I love this piece. And so kind of when you're thinking about how to use your keywords and how to fit that naturally within an article, think about your audience, think about the questions that they're asking, think about how you can be the best answer possible. That's what Google's trying to do with their search results, is to return people the information that they're looking for. So that's kind of my piece of advice, is think about your audience, and then from there, be the best resource you can to them.
Wonderful. I think that's if anything, you should just take that last little bit there and have that be the theme. Try to create the best content out there, and it's bound to do better than you hoped. So love that. Love all of your contributions, you guys, today. This is fantastic. I had a great time. I hope you guys enjoyed answering some questions for us here today. I think we had a little bit of fun, and yeah, I think we got through quite a few questions too, which is fantastic. We're going to wrap it up here today. We're already at the top of the hour, a little bit past actually, in fact. So I appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Again, be sure to keep an eye out for the follow-up email. That's going to have our B2B link building guide in there for you. And if you're looking for more content and something more specifically towards link building inside of the B2B space, we're also going to be doing another webinar on July 15th. That's a little bit more specific to that. So keep an eye out for that. We will be sending out notifications. It's going to be on our social. We're going to put it up as everywhere that we possibly can for you guys. But yeah, I appreciate you all joining us and tuning in. And Asia, Kevin, Justin, Michael, I appreciate all of you guys joining us. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Good job, Ben. Thanks for hosting.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for hosting.
Thank you all.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks,
All of you
everyone.
guys soon.
Bye.
Have a good rest of your day, guys.
Will do.
Yes.